And in those days, it was the roads were made of gravel for much of the length into Colwood at least, and the motor cars were unreliable. We had an old Model T, they call them flivvers, if you know, just an open touring car to get around in. And this was the case with most of the people in Metchosin, that they didn't think of commuting until at least after the war, 1945. During the war, there was gasoline rationing, and before the war, as I explained, the roads and cars were unreliable. So Metchosin was very much a rural community in those days. And my father having to find a job, we were necessarily moved into closer to the city.
So the transportation challenges made Metchosin an isolated community.
I think I could enlarge on that a little bit. A lot of my early stories about Metchosin come through Ronald Weir, who was himself a great historian, and he was born in 1913. His father took his mother into Victoria to the hospital to have the birth, and he came home in his uncle's motor car, and he always pointed to that period, 1913, as the transition from being very rural to being at least partly connected with the city. The horse and buggy was very much the part of farm life, and certainly in the 1920s.
Different now. You mentioned that your family always spent summers camping at Weirs Beach and Sandy Bay. Do you want to tell us what that was like for you?
Well, that we, I think we always had a warm feeling for Metchosin, and we had become friendly with the Weir family. And there happened to be, again, this is a little bit historical, when the railway was put through. That was in the 1915 to 20s, roughly. The work crew had left some cabins or shacks down by Weirs Beach and some tent frames where they worked. And these, Gavin Weir, who was the owner of the farms at that time, he was a grandson of the original immigrant Weir, settler, rented these cabins for about $12 a month in the summer. So as soon as school was out, we loaded up the car and the trailer and moved our tents and our belongings out to one of these cabins and tents close to the beach. There would only have been 3 or 4 other campers, the Bickerdykes being one, and other families. And I could enlarge a little bit on what life was like for us in those years. Shall I go on?
Particularly about the boating, that fascinates. What did you use for boats?
Well, I'll come around to that, but really the Weir family were very generous to us in friendliness, and it was from our cabin, it was about a 10-minute walk up the rocks to the Weir farm, and it was an evening trip every day to go and collect our bottle of milk from the dairy. Mr. Weir kept a dozen very fine Jersey cows, and so we had nice rich milk to drink. He was also still working the farm with pigs and sheep and his team of horses. That there was no tractor. Everything went by horsepower. The 2 horses, the brown one was called Prince, and the black one had a name that I can't mention, but it began with N. And we would we'd ride out on the hay wagon to the place where the hay was being made, and then ride back sitting on top of the load of loose hay, not baled. We'd be up when they were sheep shearing, watching the flock of sheep, and that was the Weir's main stay of income. There were the farm extended, I might say, from from their farmhouse right over Mary Hill into Pedder Bay, where they first settled. So it's about over 1,000 acres and up to 1,000 head of sheep. So the sheep shearing was a big part of farm life. The barn was the old original settler's barn with logs as timbers, and the milking was by hand, and the separating of the cream was by hand. The thrashing of the crop when it came in August was done by a steam engine. But as I say, we were always welcome to hang around the farm. As Jean, who was my sister, and I grew older, we were showing up our hobbies and interests at an early age. I was given to the water, and Jean was given to the land and to horses. And Billy Whitty would let Jean borrow a horse for the summer. The favorite horse was Molly. I think there was some discussion between Marion Helgeson and me one day when I was talking about it as to whether it was a Helgeson horse or a Whitty horse, but Molly was a fine animal for my sister to groom and love and ride and have for the summer. And my interest was on the water, as I say. First, Dad built me a kayak. I was about 10, and that was great. And then later on, I got $15 together and bought a rowboat. There were, as I say, only a few families around. We had a fire on the beach every evening. We'd sit around it and sing songs until it got to be bedtime. But one of the other cabins was often occupied by cousins. I was blessed with having two large sets of family cousins that would come out for 2 weeks or a month. So on the little cast iron cook stove, my mother was feeding a dozen people for their meals, but she never complained about it.
Wow.
Full oil lamps, of course, and water was available at a couple of hundred meters away at the roadside. There was a tap that had to be hauled in. And of course, no TV.
I wouldn't think. Sounds like an ideal way to spend summers, Chris.
Later on, when I got a little bigger, I would, Mr. Weir had delivered milk to the people at the quarantine station, and perhaps I should enlarge upon William Head
Yes.
at this point, because what is now the William Head Institution, or the prison, as you know, in the late 1890s was established as a Dominion federal quarantine station. It was at a time when smallpox was the big threat, and there had been one or two outbreaks of smallpox in the young Victoria growing city in the past. So every ship arriving from abroad had to stop in the bay, just to the water you're looking at in behind me. And a doctor would go out and examine the crew and speak to the captain and determine where the ship had come from. And if they were all healthy, then they were allowed to proceed either to Vancouver or Seattle. It was an international arrangement. If there was smallpox aboard, and in fact that did happen on one or two occasions, even to one of the stately Empress liners that arrived from the Orient with a sad case of smallpox on board, they were brought to a big wharf, which the remains of which are still there at the quarantine station at the prison. And they would be tied up there for 2 or 3 weeks or more until the ship was fumigated and the illness was contained. So there was a first-class hospital and a second-class hospital and Oriental's hospital there for the different crew and passengers of the ship.
Oriental's hospital, Chris?
Yep, that was for the other people who were first or second-class passengers.
Really?
That's what it was called anyway. Though the quarantine station was quite a part of life in Metchosin, certainly this part of Metchosin, the families there. Well, there was a school there for one thing. So my cousins, when they were visiting, went to school at the quarantine station school. And as I say, the families were quite open to visiting back and forth. And I was thrilled to be able to get on board the 50-foot launch that the doctor went out in to examine the ship. I see these ships from faraway places with strange-looking people looking over the whales. I think that was what I wanted to do with myself when I grew up.
Wow. You told me that associated with that quarantine station, there are a few cemeteries in this area, aren't there, Chris?
Yes, that's true. There, when we aren't locked down with COVID, the present authorities of the present are very hospitable in arranging visits to be taken to the cemetery there. It's quite an interesting display of people, some of course, who are victims of smallpox and other diseases, but others were an interesting time in our history. And this was in the First World War, when the principals of the people who were in charge of the war had the idea of bringing workers, laborers from China to the battlefields to fill in the trenches and tidy up the place. And so over the spaces of about 1918, and that went on till about 1922, because they all had to come back again, 18,000 troops passed through William Head.
18,000.
18,000. There are pictures of them in bell tents. They were treated like soldiers, and there were European officers and British officers in charge of them. And there are pictures of going on a route march right past where I'm living now. And the route march would go on for ages. And they were detained there until they could be shipped by rail across to Halifax or Montreal, and then on to Europe. They wanted an all empire route for them to travel. And then, as I say, when the war was over and the trenches had been covered up, they came back again. So understandably, a number of them lost their lives, died when they were at William Head, and both ways. And their cemeteries, their graves are there to be visited. Not to be visited, though, is an island farther around at Rocky Point, at Bentinck Island, which for many years was a place where people afflicted with leprosy were kept to either die or revive. Most of them, unfortunately, died. So there's another cemetery there with 13 graves, well kept and nicely fenced, and had been visited by a clergyman not many years ago, with a little sign saying, "Here lie the remains of 13 humans whose names are known only to God." That's not open to visitors, but the one in the prison yard is well maintained. And then, of course, the St. Mary's churchyard, which again is open to visitors when we have a Metchosin Day and people to explain whose remains are lying there.
Quite a story. I had no idea about the leper colony.
Not to mention, of course, the many graves of First Nations people that lie all over Metchosin. There are two on my own small property here, and you will come across them. A mound of stones is what you'll see, but if you look carefully, you'll see that the stones have been placed there reverently by people who took care of the remains. There are many of them at Rocky Point.
Let's talk a little bit about your your service in the Canadian Navy, Chris. I know you were in the first class at Royal Roads, weren't you?
Yes, I was when it became a naval college. There had been some reserve officers trained there previously, but when Royal Roads became the Royal Canadian Naval College, I was in the first intake there. We were just there for a year, and then we were off to face the foe. But that was the beginning, of course, Royal Roads being a naval college. And then I was back on the staff for a year or more when it was a joint combined Navy Air Force college. And then, of course, it became a Navy, Armed Forces College, which is what it was for most of its life until it was paid off and became what it is now, a public university. That was in, when was that, 1995, about then.
Okay.
So, yes,
Yeah.
that were,
Um,
we slept, the cadet block hadn't been finished when we were there. And so we lived in the castle, which was quite fun. There were 7 of us in one of the bedrooms with our desks, and we had our meals in the Dunsmuir dining room. The Dunsmuir drawing room was our recreation room. It was, yes, gracious living.
so you didn't manage to stay there for very long. You went right overseas, didn't you, Chris?
That was right, and it was the settled practice in those days that if you were going to, some of our people wanted to just serve in the Navy during the war and then get out and go back to university. But those who were interested in making a career of it, and there were, I think, 25 or 30 of us, went across to the Royal Navy for training. We traveled on board the Queen Mary across the Atlantic as passengers. And do you know how many people were on board? This
No.
was crossing in August from Halifax to Glasgow there were 19,000 of us. And
19,000 aboard the Queen Mary?
it was a full division of the Canadian Army, which is 18.
Oh.
And then there were odds and ends of Air Force and Navy on top of that. So we were about 4.5 days passing from Halifax to Gourock or Glasgow, the Clyde. And then I went off to a British battleship that was based at the famous Scapa Flow. Our job there was to protect convoys that were going up to North Russia and to Murmansk. And so we spent a year or so. The convoys only sailed in the dark months when it was north of the Arctic Circle, and we be in total darkness for 24 hours. It was too easy for the submarines to attack them in the summer months. So there were a couple of Germans, the Scharnhorst and the Tirpitz, that were in Norwegian fjords waiting for the convoy to go past. And our job was to place ourselves between the convoy and the German enemies. And so that was later on. I was in British destroyers, and we would go out to 12 degrees west longitude to meet the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth and the other fast ships coming in and try to escort them against submarines.
You started as a midshipman, didn't you?
That was what the rank was in those days. Yes.
Yes. And you went on to specialize in navigation?
Yes, and I was interested in becoming a navigator, so that was my job. One of the nice jobs was to navigate HMCS Haida, who was perhaps our most famous of the wartime destroyers. We went out through the Panama Canal to Korea and came back through the Suez, which gave us a around the world trip. And over a period of about 10 months.
Wow.
That was
Must. And then you finally were you took command of some of these ships, didn't you? Finally, Chris.
eventually that was what the aim was. It was to get a ship of your own, as they say. And the Navy was good to me, and I was given commands, and then finally, I guess you're given a squadron of ships, which means that there are 3 or 4 of them clustered together that you can fool around with, and
Fool around with, really.
that was fun. My last job in the Navy, though, was to look after the Naval Reserve, and it was a job that suited my personal needs. It was not one that everybody volunteers for, but I did, and it was one of the most rewarding 6 years that I had in the Navy. It meant dealing with some very enthusiastic young people who were volunteers for training as part-time sailors. It was at a time when the armed forces were in poor shape after the defense minister, Paul Hellyer, had unified everybody and reduced their strength and demolished the morale of the forces. I found the morale to be sky high in the reserve and very rewarding. It gave me, as they say, a chance to get out to the West Coast and see my father a couple of times a year. And it also gave me a very rewarding insight into 18 different cities across Canada, from Victoria to St. John's, Newfoundland. And they always wanted to show off their town as being that's the best place to live in Canada. And they were only too enthusiastic to learn how to be a part-time sailor. Some of them have gone on to great things.
Wow.
A rewarding sort of cap to my time in the Navy.
During those war years, Metchosin showed some of the symptoms of it too. You were talking about what was happening at the Rocky Point munitions and Albert Head, Maryhill. Were there guns established in those places?
Yeah, it's interesting how the federal government, and one form or another, has taken an interest in the land in this part of the world. I think it probably, well, going right back to the beginning, of course, is Race Rocks Light, which in 1860 was, as well as the light at the entrance to Esquimalt Harbor, they opened at the same time, were the first lighthouses to be installed on this forlorn and far distant coast of it was British North America. It wasn't even Canada at that time. It was this colony that was much contested between here and our American friends. So starting with that, I suppose the next thing was a quarantine station, which I mentioned its role, but the first one was at Albert Head. And when a couple of smallpox cases got into Victoria from the quarantine station, they decided that it had to be moved farther away. So in about 1890, I think it was, 1895, they established the present quarantine station, which was part of the Weir's farmland, as I mentioned. And then come the Second World War, or the preparations for it, and we've always thought that we were open to attack from the sea, as far as the people in Victoria is concerned. So we took up the farmland at Albert Head, and then at around Maryhill. And to bring the link back to the family, my father was in the real estate firm that had to knock on people's doors and say, "I'm very sorry, but your farm or your home has been confiscated by the army or to
Wow.
military purposes." And some people were delighted and said, here are the keys, off we go. Others broken-hearted, particularly some people at Rocky Point who continued to speak to me about their sadness at having to give up the lovely property they had. But so there we have Albert Head, and we have William Head and Mary Hill as places that the military has removed from private use. And that was followed by the Rocky Point arsenal, which is a place where the Navy keeps its ammunition. In 1950, when we had a revival of wartime or tensions anyway with NATO, and the Navy's old place where it kept ammunition was being built up with housing around it. So the Rocky Point area was co-opted for military purposes. On top
Such
of
a
that, there's Helga's announced, like I say, where the shipping control radar is located, and which one previous mayor blocked off from public access. That was a lovely viewpoint for us to climb to the top of it and look off across the land. So
wonderful.
there's been quite a lot of Ottawa co-opting of land in the church.
Indeed, we have a list. You were had the opportunity to meet some interesting people while you were globetrotting. Tell me about meeting Indira Gandhi.
Oh, that was interesting. There was a course which is now no longer offered, unfortunately, called the National Defense College Year, and it was a collaborative one. There was one in Britain and one in the United States, and I think Australia, and Canadians could go to any of them, and people from those countries could come and take a year with us. And we had some really interesting. It was based on Kingston, Ontario, and we would have some very interesting talk from visits from various cabinet ministers to come and give a lecture. But then we were also given our own airplane to fly across Canada and up into the north, to fly to South America and visit some of the countries there, and then fly around the world.
I'm so jealous.
A month. And, so we got to have an audience with the Pope of that time. And we,
Pope Paul VI, was it?
I think it was, yeah. And then in India, we had a session with Madam Gandhi, and it was a very large grounds in her official residence, and there was a tent on the lawn that would hold all 35 of us comfortably, and we were waiting for her to arrive. She was about half an hour late. She came in and apologized and said that she'd been meeting a group of teachers from South India, and that they had some problems they wanted to lay before her. And so we that sort of gave an impression of the way she ran her job. It was pretty impressive. We thought that she would do that every morning before she went to work, if you like.
Amazing. Chris, while you were wandering around the world and leading things and commanding things and earning the Order of Military Merit for Canada, you were also a husband, a father, a grandfather. Would you like to tell us about your family?
Oh, yes, the family. Yes, I'm equipped with all of the above. The Navy, of course, required my services in Halifax for quite a long time. And so much so that, mind you, there were visits or duties in Ottawa, and also a couple of very pleasant years spent in Norfolk, Virginia. But basically it was Halifax, Nova Scotia. And Mary, my wife, is a country girl and loves horses, which meant that we usually had to find somewhere where there were stables and pasture to suit my domestic needs. We did find a really nice one when we were outside Norfolk, Virginia.
Mhm.
We also found time to have 4 children. Mark, who is the number one, lives here in Victoria.
Hi, Mark.
He be tuned in. He's if so, hi Mark. And Mark has 3 fine sons.
Here, but you can't hear me or see me, I guess.
You there? Better keep my careful what I say.
I was just waiting for it. I'm gonna go back on mute in case you say something.
Mark's 3 sons, my 3 grandsons as well. Mark, one's a helicopter pilot in the Air Force, also married to a helicopter pilot, which is quite an interesting arrangement. And they're both serving on the same base, the same squadron. One who's in the law business and is currently working on his master's degree in George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And the tallest and strongest of the 3, young David, is a policeman in the Vancouver City Police Force, all with nice partners. So then the next in line is Patricia, known as Tisha, and she's a school teacher, retired, and also with a horse commitment, with a nice house and 2 acres in Liverpool, Nova Scotia, where she lives next door to the youngest of the family, whose own daughter is coming to visit me for a couple of weeks. Mary Allison is the daughter, and Sarah is her mother. And also there's a Christian who is at university in Halifax. So that leaves Nick, who is in fact number 3 in the succession, who's also a Nova Scotian, married to a Nova Scotian. This has 2 very fine Nova Scotian daughters, one of whom has only in the last couple of weeks presented me with a great granddaughter. And
Congratulations.
are doing well. So it's a long distance. My wife, Mary, I must mention, is living in a comfortable seniors home in Nova Scotia. She preferred to stay there rather than to come back to Victoria. But the thing that brought me back to Victoria was my father, who was reaching the end of his days, and there was no family member on the. But I'm recounting members of my family. There was my sister Jean, who she of the horse back in our childhood. She spent her working life at the University of Toronto, the U of T, and lived there until her final days. So my father was on his own right here on the spot where I'm sitting. It seemed to me that my place of duty was to be with him for the last little while. Anyway, I had grown to remember how fond I was of Vancouver Island during my visits running the Naval Reserve. So I found a job at UVic in the chemistry department. And I said that chemistry was always my worst subject at the interview. They said, that's fine, you keep your nose out of our chemistry and we keep our nose out of your administration. And that worked very well and allowed me to be on hand to see my dad over the final couple of years. And then I realized that probably this is where my roots were. And so that's really how it has worked out there. And I've happy to have established myself back in Metchosin and with my Metchosin friends. And,
I understand you retired in 1978. What have you been doing to keep yourself busy since?
oh yes, well, if you live in Metchosin, you're by definition busy. One of the things that was on offer, I think there was an ad in the paper by the John Howard Society, whose job it is to, or whose, it's a volunteer society to look after the welfare of inmates of prisons. I asked whether there were volunteers to come out to William Head once a week of an evening and spend a couple of hours with inmates who wanted to sit and talk. And so it was all too easy for me just to drive a couple of miles to the prison and sit and have a cup of coffee with an inmate or two. I found it fascinating. Of course, as we all know, the William Head on Stage has a
Yes.
department, which again is unfortunately in abeyance during the COVID period, but I hope it'll be back and in full whisker again when that's over. But you did get to meet some interesting inmates and hear their version of why they shouldn't be there. And some with a little wistful sense of humor, and others still will hurt, and some rather poignant stories, and some that you knew because they would probably be back again someday. I'm just wondering whether there were any other stories that would be worth. It was, you hear the story of the long distance truck driver to come home in the middle of the night to find somebody else in his bed, and that resulted in a murder. And but there was one who was a chimney sweep, and he was a very good chimney sweep with his son working as a team. And but they were terrible people for the drink. Come the weekend, they would have a cabin up on Shawnigan Lake, and they would fill the back of the trunk of the car with drink, and that was the way they would pass their weekends. But he was gentle enough, and as they say, an older man. He went into town and he did a little banking, and we went to play crib with a friend of his, and then dropped around to see his son, who'd come home from his chimney, and the son's partner, and everything was very friendly. And I did sort of wonder to myself how it could be that the old man had been charged with murdering his wife. I didn't mention that point. How the son could be so sort of friendly to his father when his father just killed his mother. But it was again a very warm relationship, and that I, of course, had him back by 4 o'clock to William Head. Sometime later, one of the other inmates was talking about this fellow and said, a lot of us inside figure it wasn't the old man who killed his wife, it was the son who killed his mother. And he said, look, you've got a life ahead of you. I'm old, I'll take the rap. And the law will be happy to have somebody. And I thought that was kind of a lesson in human relations.
What an extraordinary story.
So then, of course, we haven't even mentioned Pearson College, which is occupies a large part of another piece of national defense land that was made over for that use. And that really has been, well, I call it my fountain of youth, because the college is always looking for families and homes and people who will invite the students in for their breaks when they have time off, either at breaks or in winter time, or just over for a meal. And many of us in Metchosin do that, I well know. and they also know well just how satisfying it is to have these people to talk to. I call them my fountain of youth, because it is good and it's a mutual benefit, a win-win. And those connections go back from early days with me, and some of them, we're on Facebook, we're on visiting basis, or following their careers through their lives. That's been a great asset. And then the Metchosin Council asked me to sit on the Heritage Committee, which I do, and it's not a very busy committee, but we do have a few. When COVID is not ruling the world, we do have a few things to try to present a perspective of what our early days were like. Those things. What else do I do?
Well, you spent a couple of terms chairing the Metchosin Foundation board.
Oh yes, the Metchosin Foundation.
Remember that?
now being very officially chaired by my interlocutor, Carol. There was a Metchosin resident since departed, came from the United States, but it was at the time when Metchosin was just becoming officially a
municipality,
a rural municipality. And I think it's worth mentioning, well, I think we have time, that Metchosin was the first of the Western communities to incorporate as a municipality. It was while Langford and Colwood were still part of the CRD, as East Souk is still, and so are a few of the other. And the reason that Metchosin, in case anyone's forgotten, is that we did not want to have sewerage. We were quite happy with our septic tanks, thank you. And having sewerage, of course, means going into debt, raising a bond, getting the money together. And that wasn't the way we wanted to go. And it was at this time that I say, his friend said that, a friend of Metchosin, really Joe Mitchell was a large mover behind it that he spoke to. He said, you need a community house, you need a newspaper, and you need a foundation to help with funding worthy causes. And so that's how the foundation came into being. And how long ago is that now, Carol? 20 years?
Yeah, probably.
At least. Yeah. But Joe Mitchell deserves the.
It's now a registered charity, so that's been an asset.
It is a registered charity. So
in 2001, you were recognized as Metchosin's Volunteer of the Year because there was that long list of things you were doing on a volunteer basis.
That's right. I'm very proud of that recognition. Have a nice little plaque to confirm it.
So what are your hopes for the future of Greater Metropolitan Metchosin, Chris?
Well, it was sort of like the march that you played at the beginning of the program. Steer up, my lads, it's to glory we steer. I even heard a mention of thinking of Metchosin as being declared as a United Nations World Heritage Site. I'm going to stay out of politics because that's part of the game. But I think the longer we continue, the more distinct community seems to become. And that's entirely up to the people who live here, whether they like this style of life or whether they would like to follow in the wake of Langford and Colwood. But we have to remember that we don't really determine our own destiny. It's the province that governs municipalities and tells them what they must do. But I do think that Metchosin is an example of a way of life near an urban center that is getting along very well with its present, can I say laid back? I think it's laid back lifestyle. And I hope that that may be recognized and appreciated by others. There's a sign at the entrance to the state of Oregon, which says, "Welcome to Oregon, come and enjoy our beaches, but then please go home."
Yes, Chris.
So I think we're very delighted to have people come and enjoy the paths and the trails and the lakes and the seashore. But anyway, maybe that's about as far as I should go as far as seeing the future, when we have really been overtaken by quite a few surprises in Metchosin in our time, with things that we didn't initiate, like wars. But our community house has been an excellent meeting place, and it's too bad that it is of reduced capacity at the present time. But the rough voice singers were always a good fun evening. The interesting movies and lectures that we have had on a monthly basis. I hope that we can get back to that, and just the question of seeing each other and having a cup of tea or coffee and meeting. I do wonder though about new people are coming into Metchosin all the time, and there's a turnover, and whether we are really welcoming them sufficiently and bringing them into the circle. We do tend to have long driveways and tend to disappear down the end of them, and not be so warm and outgoing as we might be. Yeah.
Chris, this is wonderful. I think we're a little over time. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, thank you very much for giving me the chance to get some things off my chest. And I think in our own humble way in Metchosin,
Right.
we're managing to set an example of quiet leadership in how to, I should add that it wasn't like that many years ago. There were people were at each other's throats. You park your car on my lawn, that sort of thing. So I think probably the people who have been on our councils and boards and the very many other things, and there are certainly lots of voluntary activities to get involved in Metchosin, have managed to succeed in making it a place where there's room to be yourself without being bothered, but at the same time a place to reach out and know our friends and neighbors.
Great.
That's
May I turn it over to Lori in case there's people with questions here?
Yeah, absolutely. We still have time. If anybody wants to ask any questions of Chris or share any anecdotes, feel free to just unmute your mic and jump in.
Stunned silence.
Chris? Hi, Chris. It's Bonnie Hardy talking. I just wanted to thank you so very much. That was a fascinating hour. You have had such an exciting life and you've lived it really well. And I can't thank you enough for sharing it with all of us today. Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Betty, did you want to jump in? I see you turned off your mic.
Oh, I was
Turned
just going to mention thank you very much. I've lived in Metchosin for about 20 years, and I too really miss, a lot of the things that we used to have at the community house, and I hope that some of them will be able to come back. But I wanted to mention I'm still visiting my 95-year-old dad. So he was born in 1926, and he actually still remembers being in the Canadian Air Force just at the very end of the Second World War, going out and having training at Fort Rod Hill. So I haven't asked him if he also went to Maryhill. So that would have been in 1944 that he would have been at Fort Rod Hill. And he talks about the big guns there and so on. But I was just wondering if they would have also gone to Maryhill and maybe Albert Head.
In 1944, they were certainly there. The Albert Head had guns of 8-inch in diameter, which were similar to the ones at Fort Rod Hill. The ones were at Maryhill were 6 inches, but they could reach across the. Actually, the ones at Maryhill were British, and they didn't make it across the Atlantic during wartime. The ship they were in was sunk. So the Department of Defense had quickly to buy some from the United States. So the ones that were actually used were Americans. But and because I was away during this act, I've only once heard the guns fire from the top of Maryhill, and it was quite a boom. But quite possibly your dad was there.
Maybe, yeah. Well, your stories are fascinating.
I just might introduce my roommate if he'll.
Here we go.
He's escaped from me. Yeah,
a cat? Is it a cat?
My man Friday. Yeah, yeah, he's a good boy. Oh. Here he is.
Beautiful.
He's been sleeping on the end of my bed all this time. He doesn't like publicity very much.
Looks lovely.
Very handsome.
Beautiful.
He's a junkyard cat. He came inside the engine of my friend's car at the car salon one night, and he was discovered. But we've been friends ever since.
Any other questions for Chris or the cat or Carol?
I think there should be a really big thank you to everybody for organizing this. It's wonderful. It's the first one I've joined. I'm really glad some of our other traditions are still going, our Metchosin Muse.
Yes. Well, there's such interesting people squirreled away in the back of Metchosin. There's such a variety, and the Senior Center Without Walls program that Laurie has introduced to us is really giving us an opportunity to learn about these experiences and share. And I'm really enjoying it.
And on that note, I'll just add that our next in the speaker series will be Joe Mitchell interviewing Brian Killip, and that's on Thursday, October 7th.
Brian Killip could also interview Joe, really. Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah, so watch for that. This is being recorded, and I'm going to upload it to our Metchosin Seniors YouTube channel, and I'll share it out farther and wider for those who couldn't make it today. But for everybody who did, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Carol, for all your work and preparing for the interview.
Any excuse to work with Chris is a good one.
And Christopher, it's been just fascinating to hear about your life in Metchosin.
Well, you're very kind, and thank you very much for your interest. It's been a lot of fun joining everybody.
Enjoy your kayak, Chris.
Yeah.
Yes, it's still there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Lori. Bye-bye.